بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. Everyone looks focused, inshallah, and ready to go on a Sunday morning. The weather's getting, was nice actually yesterday and should be nicer today, inshallah, so make use of, make use of that weather before it goes. Inshallah, we're going to get restarted. We're going to continue on with the material, inshallah, today. But before we do, just a little bit of housekeeping. I think everybody, except for we're missing 2 people who haven't written the exam. So if you had special circumstances that prevented you from writing it, inshallah, please contact me at the earliest. Talk to me after the class so we can arrange for that, inshallah, because next week the plan is to just go over the exam and review it together, inshallah. So without further ado, inshallah. Anyone have any questions, by the way, before we move on about anything? Again, the other thing is, I should mention too, is I've had many one-on-ones, but I haven't talked to everyone yet. So if you haven't booked your one-on-one yet, or you missed your appointment, please connect with me. The email that Sister Nada sent has my phone number, so just text me or email me at a convenient time for you, and we can arrange for that, inshallah. I need to have those one-on-ones just to make sure that everybody is okay with so far. We're halfway through the course essentially, and if there's any issues, we address them right away, inshallah. And if there's any improvements, given that this is you guys are basically the first cohort to go through this, then we improve as we go along, inshallah. Anybody have any questions or concerns or comments? Okay, and there's a sign-up sheet here. If the attendance sheet, if you haven't signed in already, you can do that after the class, inshallah. طيب. Today is going to be a little bit of a history lesson. So some people might find it interesting. Some people might find it a bit dry, depending on what you like. But inshallah, we're going to talk a little bit about some history. A lot of it's history. But when I say history, I mean kind of like physical history, like you actually see artifacts and some images of how things progressed with respect to the Quran. But before we do that, I think we have to wake it up one more time. Sorry. And I apologize. I think Sister Nada just uploaded the PDF. It's my fault. I didn't do it last night. I got distracted. And once again, I think this is just the incompatibility of the presentation with the Macs. Before we start, we always renew our intention why we are here, and I try to bring different ahadiths to kind of make us align on why we're here, so that we gain the benefit, inshallah, and obviously the reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because if we don't have the right intention and we're coming here for whatever reason, right? And that reason can change from week to week. We always have to just refocus ourselves. We won't get the benefit of the reward. So I like to usually pick on someone to read the hadith, just to get us a little bit of the blood pumping in the morning. Who wants to volunteer to read the first hadith? No volunteers? Abdul Rahman, can you read the first hadith? Yeah, sure. It's right there. Thank you.
عبد الله بن مسعود قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم: لا حسد إلا في اثنين، رجل أتاه الله مالا فسلط على هلكته في الحق، ورجل أتاه الله الحكمة فهو يقضي بها ويعلمها.
Jazakallah khair. Barakallah feek. Anyone wants to read the English? He's next door, so you can just do it.
Abdullah ibn Mas'ud reported, The Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, "There is no envy but in two cases: a man whom Allah has given wealth and he spends it rightly, and a man who Allah has given wisdom or knowledge and he judges and teaches with it."
Jazakumullah khair. So the first hadith is fairly straightforward in terms of meaning, but I really wanted to emphasize this point. That we're in a society where everybody praises everybody else for material wealth or status, or everybody looks at envies other people based on their position in life or what they've acquired in this dunya. And the Prophet ﷺ is teaching us here that that's not why we envy people. We shouldn't be envious of people for anything, except in two matters. And here, the Prophet ﷺ says there's no envy but in two cases. And when it says a man, obviously it means obviously a woman as well. And a person who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given wealth and spends it rightly. And so, a lot of times we even look at somebody and we say, and I get this from my kids all the time, is, some people don't have as much as other people, and, how is that fair? Right? And the lesson here is, well, if you're in poverty, it's a test from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But if you're actually wealthy or have enough to live, and the definition of wealthy, by the way, the Prophet taught us is, if you have enough to eat and live for today, you're wealthy in terms of material wealth. Right? If you have enough for just today. Of course, many people, including us, alhamdulillah, we have more than just today. And so, they ask me, well, how is it, fair that these people are struggling and they have to be patient, and people who have enough don't have to go through that test? And the answer is that, well, having wealth is actually a bigger test than not having wealth. فأما الإنسان إذا ما ابتلاه ربه فأكرمه ونعمه فيقول ربي أكرمن. We all know this from Surah Al-Fajr. The human being, فأما الإنسان إذا ما ابتلاه, if his Lord tested him, فأكرمه ونعمه, that he honors him and he gives him blessings and luxury and leisure, right? That's a test. That's a bigger test than not having anything. Because when you don't have anything, the only option you have is really to be patient. But when you have, now you have a choice to make. And anytime you have a choice to make, it's a test. Which one are you going to choose? And so the person who has and gives, it's not just has and gives. That's somebody to be envious of. Not because they have, but because they give. Right? So there's also another quick story, just before we move on, that the poor people came to the Prophet ﷺ and said, the people who have, who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave them, they give for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so they're beating us in deeds. So the Prophet ﷺ taught them to do their tasbih after prayer, so that they gain the reward. So of course they started, and who heard about it? The people who had, the wealthy people. So they started doing it too. So the poor people came back to the Prophet and they said, they're doing it too now. So they're giving and they're doing what we're doing. And the Prophet said, ذَلِكَ فَضْلُ اللَّهِ يُؤْتِيهِ مَن يَشَاءُ. This is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, His fadl. He honors and gives whoever He pleases. But it is a test. And so if somebody is given and they give, that is somebody that you're envious of. Not hasad envy, not that we don't want them to be successful and we wish that they don't have and they don't give, but somebody who we strive towards, right? Somebody who we want to be like. And the other person, and this is more in our context, is somebody who's given wisdom and knowledge and teaches it and judges by it. And this is for us to focus here, inshallah. Is that this is something to be envious of, to learn and apply and teach. That is something worthy of envy. That is something we should look up to, right? Versus what society teaches us. And so, there's a very similar hadith, and this is by Sahih Bukhari and Muslim. Rawahu Shaykhan. And then the other hadith is a very similar one. Who wants to volunteer to read that one? Yes, go ahead. Mic, please. Can you pass the mic?
عن ابن عمر قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم لا حسد إلا على اثنين رجل أتاه الله هذا الكتاب فقام به آناء الليل وآناء النهار ورجل أتاه الله مالا فتصدق به آناء الليل وآناء النهار.
Jazakallah khair. Who wants to do the English? Go ahead, inshallah. Pass it to whoever you want.
Alright, Ibn Umar reported, the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, there is no envy but in two cases. A man whom Allah has given this book and he stands to recite it by night and day, and a man whom Allah has given wealth and he spends it in charity by night and day.
Right. Jazakallah khair. Similarly, another hadith by the Prophet ﷺ referred by Ibn Umar radiallahu anhuma, that there is no envy but in two cases. A man, or a woman obviously, who Allah has given the book and he stands to recite it day and night, or night and day. So this is talking about the Quran. You want to be envious of someone? Look at someone's relationship with the Quran and want to be that person. Right? And then the other is that, again, the wealth that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave somebody and he spends it day and night. So the hadith is similar. You say, well, there's two reasons for the first one, two reasons for the second, they're the same. Essentially similar. The second one emphasizes not only is it just wisdom and knowledge, but what is that wisdom and knowledge? It's the Quran. Right? Anytime you have an opportunity to learn more about the Quran, take that opportunity. Take it. That's something to be envious of. So inshallah that focuses us to fix our intent, inshallah, and strive to be those who learn the Quran and its wisdom and knowledge. Last class, which was 2 weeks ago, maybe a distant memory for some of you couldn't come as well. We talked about the written transmission of the Quran, specifically at the time of Uthman radiallahu anhu. Anyone have any questions on that topic? There was a question by a couple of the students that I will address. Actually, well, we might as well address now. So the question was, well, there's two questions I wanted to talk about from previous lectures that I didn't answer. The first one was, well, how was the Mus'haf of Abu Bakr, this is only, the Suhuf, basically he gathered the writings of the Quran into one place. It wasn't a cover to cover, but Abu Bakr gathered all of it from the Sahaba, and we know that Zayd bin Thabit was the one who was in charge of that, right? And there were conditions to accept, right? 2 witnesses, basically. 2 pieces of writing and 2 people for the recitation. Now, if that was the case, if there's one copy, then how do we have different qira'at of the Quran in terms of the writing portion, right? So there's one copy for Abu Bakr, and then Umar or Uthman radiallahu anh made standard copies, sent them to different places, and ordered for any other copies that are owned by any of the Sahaba to be destroyed, right? So how is it that there are different recitations when Abu Bakr's copy was one copy? And so the answer is that although that was written in a particular recitation that the Prophet ﷺ obviously used, Abu Bakr's time, right? The different qira'at were known, obviously, in people's hearts, and they were recited. And if there are any changes in terms of the letters for the qira'ah, and we'll talk a little bit about that very shortly, inshallah, then that was something that was captured by Uthman when he was standardizing the Mus'haf. And so Abu Bakr, although he had one copy, it's not 7 copies for 7 qira'at, that was understood that the people read that text in different ways that were acceptable based on how the Prophet ﷺ recited. And the Prophet ﷺ recited in different ways. We'll talk about the qira'at in a few weeks, inshallah. So I don't want to go into that topic, but that was a question that was asked, is if there are different qira'at and they were written differently at the time of Uthman when he gathered and standardized the Mus'haf, how is it at Abu Bakr's time? And so it was one, and people knew that this could be read in different ways. That makes sense? Okay, so that was one question. The other one that was asked was if people at the time of the Prophet ﷺ wrote on materials, on bone, skin, and stones and so on, at the time when the Quran was being revealed to the Prophet ﷺ, because remember, when it was revealed, the Prophet ﷺ would recite it to the Sahaba, the scribes, right, al-Kuttab al-Wahi, and they would write the revelation. So how did, if that was done in Mecca as well as Medina, and there was a hijrah in between, how did they actually bring their writing materials to Medina with them on hijrah? And the answer is yes. Now you could say, well, how do we guarantee every single writing made it from Mecca to Medina? Because we know that the Sahaba left a lot of their belongings behind when they did hijrah. And the answer is, well, it's not just at the time of the revelation that the Prophet ﷺ asked people to scribe and read back what they wrote. He did ﷺ as well in Medina. So obviously the Quran is being recited on a regular basis, on a daily basis. And so the Prophet ﷺ, it doesn't have to be at the time of wahi when that was written. The Prophet ﷺ easily could have told, and he did tell, his scribes to come and write the Quran down, the wahi down, even though it was revealed in Mecca and it was Medina time. And so they would write and they would recite back. And so that's how he guaranteed ﷺ that it was preserved in a writing form. Any questions? Yes? So it wasn't a copy. When we say copy, it wasn't that it was, again, so you have to just remember that the Quran is being revealed gradually, right, over 23 years. So the Prophet ﷺ, he had scribes write, and he had materials that stayed in his house. Now, even though the Prophet ﷺ, again, the order is very important, right? He ordered ﷺ, this ayah goes before this ayah, or this ayah that was revealed goes in this surah is after this surah, and so on. All the arrangement was by the Prophet ﷺ. It was still, even though people knew that was the order, it wasn't physically in that order. Okay? So Abu Bakr's time, he assigned that, okay, well, we need to put it all together in one order and in one place to preserve it. No, it was the Prophet ﷺ. They understood it. So that's why when Zayd bin Thabit was collecting the Quran, right, from the Sahaba, from two witnesses with writing, two pieces of writing, the condition is you had to have written it directly from the Prophet ﷺ when he recited it. It wasn't that, oh, you heard it from someone who heard it from the Prophet ﷺ. No, you were there, you heard the Prophet ﷺ say it, and you wrote it, and you said it back to him, right? So that was one condition, and the other condition is two people to recite the same ayah. So people knew the order because the Prophet ﷺ taught them the order. And that's why Zayd bin Thabit, when there was 2 ayat left from the end of Surah At-Tawbah, recognized we didn't write them down yet. Nobody brought the materials. We need it, right? They knew that was missing. It's not like, is there anything missing here? Well, I think there's 2 ayat. I'm not sure about it. No, people knew the Quran. He wanted to bring it together, but he had conditions he had to fulfill. So Abu Bakr's time, those were the conditions to bring all of the suhuf together in one place and in that order, physically in that order, right? So you're talking about the written part, right? Yes. No, because the order of the ayat when they were revealed is different than we find them in them. Even the ayat, right? There are ayat in, for example, Surah Al-Hajj, right? Surah Al-Hajj is half Madani, half Makki, right? Well, if it's half and half, parts of it were revealed in Mecca, and then, Quran didn't stop, and then it didn't like come, it wasn't like end of Mecca, and then they did the hijrah, and then we just started Medina, and let's finish Surah Al-Hajj. No, these ayat came later, and then the Prophet said, well, in terms of the order where to put it, we should put it here. And that's based on the teachings. Right? So even the ayat as they were coming, the Prophet was saying, this set of ayat go in this surah, which already started. Right? So, but that process of putting all of things together in order and in one place and making sure it's from beginning to end, Abu Bakr did that. Okay? And the Prophet, we talked about why the Prophet didn't do that. Why didn't the Prophet leave behind a written copy? We talked about that, right? So that's the importance of what Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu did. Okay? Any question? Okay, sorry, I think I skipped there. So we talked about that. We talked about the masahif, the different masahif of the companions very briefly, and then we went into the Qur'an's manuscript and print. We talked about the voweling marks, tashkil, that was added to the Qur'an, right, to help people make sure they recite it properly. Who added that, by the way? The voweling. Yes, Abu Aswad al-Du'ali, right? We talked about him resisting the request from the Khalifa, and then he recognized the need, because he didn't want to do something that people before him, the Sahaba, didn't do, and the Prophet didn't do. So he said, I'm not doing that. And then he recognized people started to mess up the recitation of the Quran pretty badly. So he realized, okay, I have to do something about it. Now, is it okay to add vowels to the Quran? Is that a change to the Quran? Is that a change? It's not. It's just to help you pronounce the ayat properly. That's all it's doing. It's protecting the recitation of the Quran, because when you look at it and read, you can mess it up. Especially the diacritical marks. Those are the dots that you see, right? If I gave you a word right now and you gave me a word without the dots, right? Unless I was extremely strong in the Arabic language, would I know that this is a ba or a ta or a tha? Right? Jim or ha or kha. So those dots were extremely important, and they were added. And then the evolution, we talked about the script and the spelling of the words, and then the appearance of the masahif. We're going to go into that today, inshallah. So, in terms of the Qur'an's manuscript and print, before we show, how the printing process kind of worked and what the Qur'an started to look like physically, I know this is a very busy slide, and I know I got the feedback is sometimes you put too much information. I will not put as much information anymore on slides going forward, because I think most people, it is too much to actually see and look at it during the class. So I will, inshallah, this is going to be a rare occasion. If you actually like to have a lot of notes on the slide because it saves you from writing, I apologize. But inshallah, for going forward, we're going to have less words, inshallah, on the slides. But this is a very busy slide. What I want to make clear when we talk about the Mus'haf. So remember, we said at the time of Uthman, how many standard copies did Uthman radiallahu anhu make? Yes. 5 is a strong opinion. There are scholars at 4 all the way up to 8. There is also a strong opinion that says it's 7, because there are 7 qira'at. And each qira'ah, each standard copy that Uthman produced is based on 1 qira'ah. Okay? So, and when we talk about qira'at, inshallah, we'll go into more details there. But remember, no matter which of the 4 or to 8 masahif, let's use the number 7 for now. The 7 standard mushafs, right, that were produced at the time of Uthman, no extra ayah in any of them. No different arrangements in any of them. All of them had the same arrangement and same number of ayat. Okay? When we say ayah, we'll talk about what that means later, because we probably don't appreciate that, the start and end of a section in the Quran, a sentence, for lack of a better term, there are differences between the qira'at. So when I say ayah, I don't necessarily mean when it starts and when it finishes, but what I mean is the actual content of the Quran is in order in all of those copies. Okay? So there's no exceptions there. So how are these copies different, though, from each other? Is that there are differences in terms of letters. Huruf jar, for example, you'll see a waw versus no waw, or a fa without a fa, or no fa. So I have examples down there, inshallah, too. And this is not done accidentally and say, oh, somebody forgot the waw here in this copy, but not this copy. No, this is by design because that waw was in one of the qira'at. Some qira'at have that waw, for example, some don't. And so this mushaf will have it, this will not. So a lot of people, I don't know how many here, but a lot of people assume that every single mushaf will have exactly the same letter by letter wherever you get it from. Well, it depends on the qira'ah. And it depends on which of the 7 standard masahif that Uthman radiallahu anhu produced. Again, there's no changing in the words. Huruf al-jar, for example, those letters that we're talking about, don't change the meaning. But they are just how the Quran is recited is a little bit different. And again, this is not by accident, this was on purpose, and this is to accommodate the various recitations and what we call the ahraf, which we will cover inshallah. Their differences in letters are reflected in the qira'at. Again, we'll talk about that in the future inshallah. And know that the Prophet ﷺ recited in different ways, the mushaf. In all recitations, if they can be accommodated by one spelling, then basically the same word is used. So example is Maliki Yawmiddin or Maliki Yawmiddin. Maliki or Maliki, is, if you look at the mushaf, you could say it both ways because there's no alif, there's just that little hash mark, right? The top that extends the med. So Maliki or Maliki, same word. So you could recite it either way. And that's why I'm sure everybody's heard the Imam at some point read in one of those two ways. So if the recitation can be accommodated by one spelling, then the same word is used. If the recitation cannot be accommodated in one spelling, then you have differences between the masahif. One will have med, one will not, for example. Okay? So the companions didn't write both recitations or different recitations in the same mushaf to obviously avoid confusion. Right? So that's why you have differences between the standard copies of the Quran. Again, what are those differences? For example, وَلَا يَخَافُ, right? Versus فَلَا يَخَافُ. Sorry, I think the PowerPoint here is messed up. It should be with a PDF. That's supposed to say وَلَا يَخَافُ versus فَلَا يَخَافُ. So the wa and the fa, that's the difference. Or وَبِالزُّبُرِ وَبِالْكِتَابِ الْمُنِيرِ versus وَالزُّبُرِ وَالْكِتَابِ الْمُنِيرِ. So the ba is added in one of the qira'at. Again, very subtle, doesn't change the meaning. It's a harf jar, but you know that those differences exist. Although the masahif are not present with us anymore, right, from the time of Uthman, although there are differences of opinion, we'll show that inshallah when we talk about the different scripts. We rely on the number of scholars who wrote about this topic. There's literature, classical work, Kitab al-Masahif, for example, is one of them, that talks about the differences between the different standard copies. That's how we know. That's how we know there are differences, because people wrote about this, and there's lots of classical work. And there's also books that talk about the differences in words, why this is Maliki, Maliki, and it's all captured knowledge. And you can tell by our history that every little detail our scholars took care of. Certainly that the Quran has been preserved to the minutest detail is what I want you to walk away with here, because my sense is when I talk to a few of you one-on-one, there's confusion, difference of opinion of the Quran in terms of what's in it. There is no difference of opinion in terms of the text, the content. It's standard, nothing's left, nothing's been changed. The order is the way the Prophet ﷺ taught us, who obviously was taught by Jibreel alayhi salam. So make sure when you walk away from here, there's no, there's differences in the Masahif and Quran's different here than here. The only differences are based on the recitations, and the Prophet ﷺ recited the Quran in 7 ways. We'll talk about the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ when Jibreel came to him and said, this is how you should recite it. And he asked, this is too difficult on my people, and then, because of everyone's different tongues. And so he asked for a little bit of ease, and then the 7 ahruf came. So make sure you don't walk away thinking, well, there's differences in Quran and we don't know which one's right. The text is consistent, nothing's been left behind, nothing's been added, and the arrangement is 100% done at the time of Prophet ﷺ. Any questions? So that's very important because we're talking now about different ways when you look at to different masahif, where the differences could come from. Okay, so we talked about early, so the writing materials, they were done, we said, on animal skin, on bones, on rocks, and this was during the time of the Prophet ﷺ. The ink was prepared from soot. These were the early manuscripts of the Quran. And remember, all the Quranic text or script was without any vowels or diacritical marks. Right? There are no dots and there are no tashkil at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, and at the time of Abu Bakr, and at the time of Uthman. Right? None of that was there because they knew how to read those words. They didn't need any help. There was also no headings or separations between the surahs. Okay, right now you open the Mus'haf, which surahs? Okay, this is the title. They didn't have that at the time. The only way you could know is by the Basmalah. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Okay, and we'll talk a little bit about that shortly, inshallah. And there's no formal indication of an end of an ayah in terms of the early manuscripts. So the scholars distinguish between the 2 types of early writing: the scripts, how the Quran was written, the calligraphy. There's Kufi and Hijazi. Those are the predominant 2 at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. What's the difference? I'll show you physically what it looks like. Kufi is very, it's pretty, it's what we call heavy and not very dense. You'll see the photo, what I mean by that. And Hijazi is lighter and more dense and slightly inclined towards the right. I think I have here, yeah. So this is a Hijazi script. So you can see it's slightly inclined to the right, and it's fairly informal. Okay? I don't know if you can see that, well, if you have it on your screen. I don't know if anyone can read that, by the way. Anyone read it? It is. So I gave you the ayah numbers there too. I know. Surah Al-Baqarah, right? So you can see no tashkil, no dot. It's, again, for us, this is very difficult. At the time of the Sahaba, this was, it's written. It's what's wrong with you? It's clear, right? Yes. You wanted to read it? We're deciphering it. Oh, okay. So it's not very clear on this screen, but you'd have to look at it on your screen. So this is the Hijazi manuscript is written on vellum, mid to late 7th century. So you could say, do we have manuscripts from the time of Uthman? We'll talk shortly about that, inshallah. But in terms of the complete Mus'haf, from beginning to end, we don't have that from the time of Sayyidina Uthman. Okay? But there are pieces or fragments in different places that point that this could be from the time of Uthman radiallahu anh. Okay? Some believe that Hijazi is older than Kufi, while others say they're both at the same time. But Hijazi was the less formal style. This is the Hijazi. So again, here it is again, the same print. This is, can anybody read at least the beginning of the second page? Because you can tell that that's a new surah, right? Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. You can start with that. Can anyone read it? How clear is it on my screen? Let's see. Anyone read it? Do you guys see Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim? Okay, what's after it? طه ما أنزلنا عليك القرآن لتشقى. I don't know if I have a pointer here. It's the end of the first line. طه ما أنزلنا. The last word. أنزلنا. Okay? So you can see it's pretty tough to read. Again, at the time of the Sahaba, this wasn't tough because they knew how to read that. Obviously, they're well versed in the Arabic language. The other, so this was written on sheep or goat skin, and this is actually a fragment that is being held at the University of Birmingham in the UK. By the way, even non-Muslims recognize the value of this and they take care of it, right? Like it's not like, oh, Quran, we don't, no, this is important. Like people preserved it, and we'll talk about World War I and the end of World War I at the fall of the Khilafah. The Quran was, a copy of the manuscript was there and they took care of it. Okay? And there's the Kufic script. You can see it's more formal. Right? So that's the test. So on the next exam, I'll give you one of these, and you have to write down what it says. I'm just kidding. Okay. So two main forms of script. So the old manuscripts of the Quran, again, in terms of the original masahif or manuscripts, complete or sizable fragments are still available today, but not earlier than the 2nd century after Hijrah. Okay, so we're talking about the 2nd century after Hijrah, so it obviously comes after the time of Uthman radiallahu anh. The earliest copy which was exhibited right now that we have in terms of a full copy or near full copy is in the British Museum. And that's dated from the late 2nd century. So you're thinking, oh, what's the oldest copy out there? This is said to be the oldest full copy. There are also, again, this doesn't mean there's not different odd fragments here and there on papyri. There are, and some of them date back to the 1st century. And I'll show you an example of that shortly, inshallah. There is a copy of the Quran in the Egyptian National Library on parchment made from gazelle skin, and it's about approximately to be around 58 years after the Prophet's death. So it's not a full copy. So I think it's a fragment, not a full copy. So what happened to Uthman's copies? Remember, there were different standard copies. What happened? So they got sent out to different places, but what happened to them now after that? That's what the question is. Are they still around? They're not still around, are they? Okay, well, difference of opinion. So if you're interested in where they might have gone, we will explore that. A lot of people like this topic, and some people think, well, it's too much history for me. I think it's interesting. So remember, there was a copy sent to Damascus, right? The Damascus copy. So early in the 3rd century, 3 out of the, again, there's an opinion of 4 copies, it could be up to 8, that were prepared for Uthman were destroyed in fire and war, while the one that went to Damascus was still there. Oh, sorry. Ibn Battuta says that he's seen copies or sheets from the copies of the Quran prepared under Uthman in Spain. Okay? And also in Morocco, and also in Basra. Ibn Kathir relates that he's seen copies of the Quran attributed to Uthman that was brought to Damascus from Palestine or Tabariya. So there are accounts that scholars have seen the copies of the Dimashq copy in different places. And others hold that this Mus'haf remained in Dimashq and was burnt in a fire back in 1310. Okay, so it's about 700 years ago. Yes? Because remember, people made copies from the copy. But everyone's personal copy was destroyed. But after you have a standard copy, this is from Uthman, you can replicate it. There's nothing wrong. I mean, we have a lot of masahif here, right? The Egyptian manuscript. There's a copy of an old Quran kept in Al-Hussein Mosque right now in Cairo, Al-Qahira, and its script is an old style, and it's quite possible that it was one of the copies of Uthman radiallahu anh. So again, there's evidence to show, you can't say for certain. What about the Medina copy? Because didn't Uthman leave a copy back in Medina? Well, it was seen in Medina back in the year 580 after Hijrah. So that's about almost 900 years ago, well, 850. Some say the Turks took it from Medina, and then it went to Berlin during World War I, and that's the copy I was referring to earlier. And then we know in World War I what happened. And so the Treaty of Versailles, if you know your history, which concluded World War I, contained the following clause. And I'll read this out actually, and it's written out here in the clause. Within 6 months from the coming into force of the present treaty, Germany will restore to His Majesty, King of Hijaz, the original Quran of Caliph Uthman, which was removed from Medina by the Turkish authorities and is stated to have been presented to the ex-emperor, William II. So this is evidence, this is by the Germans, written in the treaty after World War I, that this is the original Quran from Uthman's time. And they took care of it. And what happened, they sent it back, and it's in Istanbul now in Topkapi Museum. If you ever get a chance to go, you can go see, inshallah. Who's been to the museum? Did you see it?
I don't think it's
Okay. Well, yes. So it ended up in Istanbul. So the copy may have gone after World War I to Hijaz, but then it ended up back up in Istanbul. There's evidence that the Turks took it back. Yeah. So, I mean, you can follow, historically you can follow where, the chain of how things went and and who took it from what. But again, this is based on historical evidence where people think that the Medina copy went, which I think is still, the fact that it's still around is pretty impressive. What about the Imam's copy? What's the Imam's, by the way, Imam's copy? Yes. Uthman radiallahu anh, he had his own copy, right? And we all know how Uthman radiallahu anh was assassinated or killed, right? He was martyred. And he was in his home when he was being attacked, and he was reading the Quran, subhanAllah, right? That copy that he was martyred while he was reading, according to some, the Umayyads took it to Andalus, so it went to Spain, and from there it went to Morocco, to Fas. And then Ibn Battuta was reported to have seen it in the 8th century, and it had traces of blood on it, which makes sense, because that's what happened. And some claim that it went from Morocco after that to Samarkand, which is Uzbekistan. So let's follow the journey where it could have gone. So the copy, the Samarkand copy, could be the Imam's manuscript that people attribute to Uthman radiallahu anh. And for a long time, and this is a Kufi writing, right, in a Kufi script, which is what Uthman had radiallahu anh. And it's considered the oldest copy in existence, along with the Blue Quran, the Topkapi manuscript. And it's said that it went to Samarkand in 890 Hijrah, which is about 600 or 550 years ago, and it remained there until about 150 years ago. And then it was taken by the Russians, and then it remained there till 1917, and that was obviously after World War I. And some of it said obviously it got damaged and some pages were missing, and then it was returned to its former place and it's been there since then, since 1924, and there's evidence showing its authenticity. And there's also the Ali manuscript. So Ali radiallahu anh had his copy as well, that he obviously was produced from one of the standard copies. And what's interesting about it is that it was kept in Iraq, it was in Kufi script, and it had written on it, Ali bin Abi Talib wrote in the year 40 of Hijrah. Yes?
When they said it was taken by the Russians, was it because they want to battle and they took it, or were the Muslims there? They were part of the Russian Empire.
Yes. Yeah, it was the Russian Empire. And this, so this is a very valuable artifact. Whether they're Muslim or not, this is something very valuable in history, right? So this is why people, like even the Germans, right? They took care of these things. It's not like, well, we hate these people, let's destroy it. This is something, this is one of the first copies of the Quran. They took care of these things. Yes? Well, some of these are in Western museums, right? Yes? Is the Ali manuscript a complete copy? Yes. Yes. So it's interesting that it's from 40 Hijrah, and that's what it's written on it. And this is the copy of Ali. So the two copies of the Quran originally prepared at the time of Uthman are still available with us today based on historical evidence. And if you compare the text and the order of the ayat, they are the exact same as what you would find today. Okay? They'll be identical in that respect.
Do they still not have the Ajaz al-Hikam or Ajaz al-Hikam?
They wouldn't.
They wouldn't.
No. And that's actually how some people, you'll see actually in one of the slides, I think, you'll see that people are saying, well, which one's the older copy? Well, they'll look and say, well, this doesn't have tashkil and there's no dots, no nuqat, right? So this must be older.
Also, is it Ajaz or Ajam?
Ajam. Yes? You mean in terms of pages? I don't know that detail. Yes. I think because of the, Allahu Alam, I don't know the answer, but what I remember seeing is that there's a bluish tint to it. Yeah. Okay. Nobody asked about the Mus'haf of Abu Bakr. Remember? This was still around, right, at the time of Uthman radiallahu anh. That's how they standardized the copy, right? No, Uthman radiallahu anh took that Abu Bakr's copy. So Abu Bakr brought them all together, but not cover to cover, right? And Abu Bakr passed away, and it was given to Umar. Umar was obviously occupied with spreading Islam, which is obviously very important, and there was no need to do anything to the Mus'haf. So it stayed with him until he passed away, and he obviously, radiallahu anh, didn't delegate a next Khalifa. He delegated a committee to decide on the next Khalifa. So naturally that went to Hafsa, who was his daughter and the wife of the Prophet ﷺ. We said that Hafsa had this copy, and Uthman realized, remember there's the issue with Azerbaijan, the Muslims were in conflict on how to recite the Quran, so he wanted to standardize the copy, so he asked Hafsa for the copy, and she was very protective of it, she didn't want to give it, she gave it for that purpose, she wanted it back, right? So as soon as they made the standard copies of Uthman's time, she took it back. So what happened after that? What happened? So after, obviously, Uthman was martyred, Ali radiallahu anh took over the Khilafah, and then after him, Marwan bin al-Hakam. And he wasn't Khalifa, he was the governor of Medina, so he was the local leader in Medina, and he wanted to get rid of the Mus'haf. And he said, we have Uthman's copy, we don't need this, and his justification is that we already have something that's protected, that's written and preserved, and so I feared that after some time people would doubt basically the veracity of this Mus'haf, and they would say, oh, this has changed and this hasn't, or this has been added and this hasn't, and so he destroyed it. So Abu Bakr's copy was destroyed. Okay, so we'll take a break inshallah in about 5 minutes because there's going to be a natural break after this, I think this slide, because we have to move to another presentation, I think, because the file was too big inshallah. So how do these copies look like? I know it's not very clear. Are we able to just dim down the lights? Is it here? Okay, maybe that's clear. So we have, again, some materials that were given to us as early as the 10th century on actual wooden blocks and printed sheets. And from the 16th century, approximately, so does anyone know printing blocks? You know what printing blocks are? So printing, when we say printing, it's not your laser inkjet printer, okay? Printing started in around the 1400s. And what that was is basically they had a, for lack of a better term, machine. So they had a block that had a very smooth but thick surface. And what they would do is if there was handwritten materials, they would take them, they would put them onto the block, and they would carve out, again, this is all manual, right? They would carve out any place that didn't have the writing, right? So you would take out all the white space, if you will. And what's left is basically the writing, but it's obviously backwards, right? Because it's now on the block. It's like a mirror image, right? And then they would take that and then they would add ink to it and then they would press it down on materials. And so when it's pressed, that's a print. Okay, so that was around in the 1400s. So that's when the printing of, obviously, materials started to happen. And we have evidence that, obviously, people did it for the Quran. And then in the 16th century, they started having the moving types. So where you can actually replace the letters. It's like blocks of letters, and you can just replace them and then stamp it. That's printing. So for you younger ones, when you say printing, it's not what you see today, but it's physically using machines to press and put basically ink down on a writing surface. So that happened first done in Europe with respect to the Mus'haf, and later across the world. And the pattern of writing and the printing of the Quran was further standardized, what they call block form. Okay? And you can see an example, 1787, this is the St. Petersburg Mus'haf that we talked about earlier, how it looks like. Okay? Again, this is based on handwritten, and then it's pressed. First printed in Venice around 1530, that was the very first copy printed of the Quran, and that was destroyed, right, by the Roman Catholic folks. And then the second copy, which is the surviving copy that we have, that was printed in Hamburg, Germany in 1694. So that still exists. The first Quran was printed by the Muslim community, Mawla Uthman edition, which is the one I'm showing here. This is the very first one printed by a Muslim. Okay? And there are other ones that I have photos of that we'll show next, inshallah, on the next presentation. One more slide? Is there one more slide? Yeah, okay, perfect, right here. So there's a 1694 print showing the end of so this is a print in Latin on the right and the Arabic on the left. And this is Surah Al-Fatiha and Surah Al-Baqarah. And you can see the date there. So I don't know if these things interest you. I think they're very fascinating that they're still around. And this was 1698, a copy of the Mus'haf in print, Surah Al-Rahman. So you can see how things look like. So I think this is the end of the first part of the file. So we'll take a break, inshallah, as we switch to the second. Give you guys 5 minutes, and then we'll continue with it. Any questions before we do that? Yes?
So this was translated into Latin?
Yes. It's not just a translation, but it's also kind of Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's directly just the word-for-word translation, but there's a Latin script that's there. I don't know how to read Latin, so I can't tell you. A dead language? I don't know if no one knows it. I mean, a lot of the English words are based on Latin. My understanding is there's still people that, I mean, I don't know if it's taught, but. Okay, nobody speaks it. But it's still recognizable. The words are recognized. That's how people know how to spell words. I mean, some words are not derived from Latin, but the ones are. Excellent question. So I didn't answer yet, so I'll answer it now for the benefit of the class, inshallah. So, do we still write in Kufi and or Hijazi? What do you guys think the answer to that is? Yes. Well, people may write it, but do we find copies of the Quran based on that format? And the answer is no. So, Ibn Muqla in, I think, about 300 years after Hijrah, came up with the Naskhi script. The Naskhi script. And that pretty much replaced all of Kufi script. Ibn Muqla. And you can actually search him, and he's a very famous calligrapher. So all of the existing masahif that we find, most of the masahif that we find today are in two scripts. So the Naskhi script, and those are mainly in the Arabic countries, and then there's also the Farsi script, which is in like the Indian subcontinent, predominantly. There is also it's not as common, but a Maghribi script as well. So there's no more Kufi and the Hijazi. Now remember with Hijazi, with Kufi, how do you distinguish it from Hijazi? It's got elongated letters. There is a slant in the Hijazi one, right? The Kufi, the writing is more formal, right? The letters are elongated horizontally, and it's really aesthetically pleasing. It's very nice and beautiful. And it's done to kind of accommodate like the rhythm and rhyme, basically how it's written. Okay, so what you're going to see here is not obviously, is not those forms of script. So here I have examples of masahif from the Kazan Mus'haf in the 1800s and Hafiz Osman's printed Mus'haf in 1877. So you can appreciate how they look like. It's obviously different from what you see today. Does anybody have anything like this at home? There are some copies that go around still. It's not too long ago, but I mean there are copies. I may look for one. I think I have one that's a similar format as well, but it doesn't follow the standard format that we see today. And we'll talk about those standard formats, inshallah. The Egyptian copy, or edition, sorry, not the copy, but the edition. So it conformed to the written form of Uthman's Mus'haf that was written by a calligrapher known as Abd al-Khaliq Haqqi, also known as Ibn al-Khawaja. And there's a saying that, this is a kind of common saying or a well-known saying that the Quran was revealed in Hijaz and it was written in Turkey and recited in Egypt. Right? Just how popular these, Hijaz obviously modern day Saudi Arabia, right? Mecca and Medina. Although, that saying is fairly well known, that doesn't imply that it wasn't actually printed in Egypt, even though there's most of the recitations were from in Egypt. They also actually did print the Quran, and they took care of that. And you can see here a copy there, and this is the beginning of end of Surah Hud and beginning of Surah Yusuf, and this was printed by King Fuad, and this was quote unquote his his copy or his print when he established the press to do that. And it's Hafs an Asim recitation, and it was first printed in Cairo almost 100 years ago. Yeah. And printed in Turkey and read and recited in Egypt. It's just for your interest. It's not like, he's going to test us on this. This is just a common thing, that perception that people have. Because the Turks took so much care of printing the Quran, right? So much. Obviously, a lot of people do it now, and we'll talk about that shortly, inshallah. But you can kind of just appreciate here, this is less than 100 years ago. And then Said Nursi's copy, obviously very prominent figure to basically revive Islam in Turkey, and his followers established a printing press to print the Quran. That's currently being done, well, in Western Berlin in Germany. And that was first about 1947, and based on the Turkish calligrapher Hamid al-Amidi. Okay, so let's talk more modern now. Over the past, call it 30, 40 years. So in Saudi Arabia, because now, I mean, that's one of the main centers of production, it started in 1949. It's called the Meccan Mus'haf, or the Mecca Mus'haf. And this was Sheikh Muhammad Tahir al-Kurdi's calligraphy, based on his calligraphy, and it was extensively reviewed by scholars and before it's published, obviously. And you guys probably recognize this, right? You've seen this before. There's a couple of pages, Surah Al-Baqarah and Ali Imran. Another Mus'haf was published, about 30 years later, and then in 1984, they started the major printing press, which was called King Fahd Complex for the printing of the Noble Quran. That exists till today, and that's what produces a lot of the copies of the Quran. And that's located in Medina, so if you're interested, you should go visit. Who's been to Medina before? Lots of people. Inshallah, you guys can all go to Hajj soon and go to Medina to visit. So this printing complex prints in multiple qira'at, as well as translates and prints explanations and commentaries of the Quran. So it's not just the Quran itself, but in over 50 spoken languages. Again, it's a major hub for production of the print of the Quran. And they also record recitations of famous reciters as well, and they do research in Quran and in the Sunnah of the Prophet. Other major institutions in the Indian subcontinent, in Lahore, this is the print that you could see. You could print that. That would be a modern copy of the Quran. And then also in Northern Africa. So in Northern Africa, there's quite a bit of printing that happens. In Morocco is one of them. This is the end of the 19th century, so it's over 100 years ago, in the North African script called Al-Masbut. And this is a riwayah that's recited there, which is Warsh an-Nafi', which we'll talk about later, inshallah. So it was continued by Moroccan kings and then reached its peak by Muhammad VI time. You can see there's how the script looks like in that calligraphy. It's maybe not clear here on the screen. Again, I encourage you to download the PDF and get close-up shots of these. They're beautiful. So modern day, so I got a question the other day, is are we allowed to change the Quran? Continuously change the Quran? Saying, well, we're not changing the Quran. Can't change the words of the Quran, can't change the letters, the order of the Quran, but what you can change is ways to help people recite it based on how the Prophet ﷺ recited it. So we talked about tashkil, right? For example, that was old, obviously, done a long time ago. There are efforts to do that today to make it accessible to more people, especially people that are non-Arabic speaking or don't know how to read the Arabic language. And so they're trained to read it a specific way, or even not just even the Arabic language, but to recite it with tajweed. Because remember, recitation of the Quran is not like speaking Arabic. You have I know a lot of Arab-speaking Arabs that don't know how to recite the Quran based on how the Prophet ﷺ recited it, right? They're missing that tajweed. So a lot of effort, recently to, do things to print the Quran in a way to preserve the recitation of the Quran. So the broadcasting of it, the recitation of the Quran was first recorded by voice in 1960. And you guys all have heard of Al-Husari, right? It's actually recommended if you're going to learn tajweed and learn Quran to learn it from Al-Husari, because of the exact pronunciation of so clear, subhanAllah, so clear. If you want to train yourself to learn tajweed, he's one of the clearest, if not the clearest. And a lot of the shaykh, you ask anybody, who should I learn which audio should I listen to? Hawsari is one of them, if not the one. And this was an idea that was suggested by a professor in Egypt, and he actually wrote a book on how the first audio collection of the Holy Quran. So now it's interesting because we had it orally, we had it written, now we have it, right? Listening, right? I think it's fascinating how these things are continue. Humans still find ways to preserve, and this is a beautiful way to preserve. And many people use it. I personally use it. I used to drive, I still drive to work 1 hour each way, and what strengthens my memorization is listening to it. I mean, what am I doing in an hour? Just driving, right? So listening to it helps. Also, that there are different types of masahif. I'm sure you guys have come across some of them. The Tahajjud Mus'haf is written in a way that allows you to basically, so I think I don't have a copy here, no. It's basically it divides there's different styles of it, but it takes the standard 604-page Mus'haf and it condenses it to about 200 and something, 280-ish. And that is, if you're standing up in prayer at night, so you're avoiding the turning the page or where it's basically has enough for you to recite for every 2 rak'ahs. So after each rak'ah, you turn the page, and so after 8 rak'ahs, you can finish the juz'. Right? So condensed, more writing in a page so that you don't have to worry about turning. That's the Tahajjud Mus'haf. Most scholars say it's okay to read off of a Mus'haf in a non-obligatory, non-obligatory prayer. The Tajweed Mus'haf, I'm sure, subhanAllah, my time it was like, if you can find one, it's amazing, you should get it. Now it's like, well, which one doesn't have the Tajweed? Everything is color-coded now, right? So now adding the colors to help people apply the Tajweed. So you don't actually have to, you should. You should learn it from somebody who's trained and can teach it to you. But you can just through the audio and through picking up the colored, you can still start to figure things out on your own. You still need to recite it in front of someone to tell you how you're doing, but at least you can start learning Tajweed by the color coding. Does anyone have a color copy of the Mus'haf? Most people do now. Like my time, it was like a rare gem if you find it. And I'm not that old. Okay, so you might think, oh, it's like 50 years ago. No, it's not 50 years ago. Yes. Oh, even the English. Subhanallah. So that's the progression, right? To protect it and to make it accessible to people, which is fascinating. That's awesome. There's also Mus'haf al-Qira'at. I think this is really cool. I like it because I only trained in one qira'ah. So for me to appreciate the other ones. So it'll have the print in one qira'ah and it'll have on the margins how each of the different words are said in different qira'at. So that's another version that's printed now. And there's also the thematic Mus'haf, which is depending on the theme, right? The surah will change its theme. The text will change theme. It will go from one theme to another. It color codes it based on theme or story. So if you'd like to know when does it start and when does it stop, well, this is color coded for you. So for your understanding. So again, people find different ways to make the Quran more accessible, easier to read, recite based on how the Prophet ﷺ recited it and to teach it as well. Lastly, well not lastly, but another, I think, is incredible advancement is Braille, Quran in Braille, for people who can't see. Yes. Oh. So in Saudi Arabia, released a 3-volume Quran with Arabic Braille. Like, it's amazing, right? So now people who can't see can read the Quran. Obviously, you have to learn that, but and I don't know if I could learn it, but yeah, there is a Braille copy that's now exists for the Quran. Any questions or comments? So you can see how the progression of the Quran came to us now, right? And how the formats exist for the different masahif. Okay, any questions before we move on to our last topic of the day? Okay. Forms and divisions of the text. So now this is maybe a little bit basic, but it's important to understand. Because again, when you look at a mushaf, and you say, this has, I don't know, 6,666 ayat, and this one has 424 ayat. Why is there a difference? Okay, so you might think this is basic, but you need to understand these things, that they exist. Okay. So before we go into the breakdown, the word ayah in the Quran is used in different contexts. Right? When somebody says to you ayah, a lot of people think about ayah in the Quran, the actual shortest division of the Quran. Right? The fundamental unit that the Quran is divided in is an ayah. Other people say ayah means a sign. Right? So there are different meanings to the word ayah used in the Quran. One is a sign or indication. وَقَالَ لَهُمْ نَبِيُّهُمْ إِنَّ آيَةَ مُلْكِهِ. So which story is this talking about, by the way? Sorry, I didn't hear. Talut. Very good. إِنَّ آيَةَ مُلْكِهِ. Right? This is Bani Israel asking for Malik. Right? يُقاتل في سبيل الله. They want a king to lead them to battle against Jalut, right? Goliath. And the answer from their prophet, when he was assigned with Talut as their king, how is he a king? He doesn't have money, right? He doesn't have anything. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose him. وَقَالَ لَهُمْ نَبِيُّهُمْ إِنَّ آيَةَ مُلْكِهِ أَن يَأْتِيَكُمُ التَّابُوتُ. This is a sign of his kingship that the ark will come to you containing reassurance from your Lord. So it's a sign or indication, that meaning of ayah in that context. Another meaning of ayah is an admonition or lesson. Okay? يُنْبِتُ لَكُمْ بِهِ الزَّرْعَ وَالزَّيْتُونَ وَالنَّخِيلَ وَالْأَنَابُ وَمِنْ كُلِّ الثَّمَرَاتِ إِنَّ فِي ذَلِكَ لَآيَاتٍ or لَآيَةٍ. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives you crops, olives, palm trees, grapevines, etc. Indeed, in this is a sign for those who reflect. So, a miracle. سَلْ بَنِي إِسْرَائِيلَ كَمْ آتَيْنَاهُمْ مِنْ آيَةٍ بَيِّنَةٍ. Ask Bani Israel how many miracles we've given them. Miracle after miracle, right? Bani Israel, and they've seen it. So in that sense, it's the context, it's a miracle. And then what a lot of people, a verse, if I use that term, or a sentence in the Quran, and actually the Quran refers to it in that way, right? وَإِذَا بَدَّلْنَا آيَةً مَكَانَ آيَةٍ. Right? And this is talking about the abrogation, which we'll talk about in a different topic, a different time, inshallah. So technically, in Islamic sciences, ulum al-Quran, when we talk about ayah, we're talking about the Quran, the sentences of the Quran that are composed of letters and words that are separated from what is before and what is after. That's an ayah. So a specific beginning and end, in a specific place, in a specific surah, and that is the shortest unit of the Quran. Why is it important to know when an ayah starts or ends? Yes?
Because you need to know where you can and cannot stop it. Like if you know the end of an ayah, then you can stop it, but you can't stop it. It's not just stopping it.
Right, so when you're reciting Quran, particularly in prayer, it's not a must, but it's not mandatory, but it's preferable that you start at the beginning of an ayah and end at the end of an ayah, versus in the middle of an ayah. Okay? So while you're reading Quran, while you're praying, right? Or reading in general, that's important. Certainly when you're reading, laws or rules of tajweed apply, right? You have to read it with tajweed, and tajweed is to read the Quran the way the Prophet ﷺ read it, right? And that's why tajweed is important, because that's how he read it, alayhi salatu wasalam. If you don't specify where the ayah starts or ends, there are certain applications of tajweed that you can't apply, right? Rawm is one of them, for example, one of them. Yes?
So you said it's not mandatory. So can one start at the beginning of ayah or end in the middle?
So again, there could be a difference of opinion on the matter, but there is an opinion that it's not absolutely mandatory, but it's highly preferable. Yeah, but I'm not sitting here encouraging you to do it, right? I'm just saying to you, that's why it's important to know when an ayah starts and stops. Okay? So make sure that, and certainly if you're memorizing the Quran, you will be tested on basically on that. But I'll tell you why it's not mandatory shortly. Okay? Or at least one reason why it's not mandatory. Obviously, things like khutbah al-Jum'ah, right? Khutbah al-Jum'ah, one of the components is that you have to say an ayah from the Quran. So, you need to say an ayah. You need to at least start it, and it has to go from beginning to end. Right? When somebody says, Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu taqullaha haqqa tuqatihi, they shouldn't stop. They should end the ayah. وَلَا تَمُوتُنَّ إِلَّا وَأَنْتُمْ مُسْلِمُونَ يَا أَيُّهَا النَّاسُ اتَّقُوا رَبَّكُمْ الَّذِي خَلَقَكُم مِّن نَّفْسٍ وَاحِدَةٍ, right? Till the end of the ayah. So they finish it. So because one of the requirements of khutbah al-Jum'ah, you have to say at least one ayah. Okay? So that's why it's important to know when an ayah starts or stops. So there's different reasons for that, obviously. So who determined what an ayah is in the Quran? Well, there's two differences of opinion. One is that every single ayah was dictated that this starts here and stops here. That's what we're talking about, starting and stopping of the ayah. Not the words and the order, okay? Please don't go walk away and say, oh, Prophet ﷺ didn't set this. No, he said it. But when an ayah starts and finishes, two differences of opinion. One is that it came from the Prophet ﷺ, who taught the companions. And there are numerous ahadith of the Prophet ﷺ where he clearly mentions ayat in different surahs, right? An example here, whoever memorizes the last 10 ayat of Surah Al-Kahf will be saved from the trial of al-Masih al-Dajjal. This is a clear hadith that says whoever memorizes the last 10 or recites them. And in some, I think there's maybe also another opinion is the first 10. Nonetheless, the Prophet ﷺ said 10, right? So he specified alayhi salam. So one opinion is that the Prophet ﷺ said all of the beginnings and endings of the ayat. The second opinion, and some scholars say this is actually the stronger opinion, is yes, mostly from the Prophet ﷺ, but some of it is based on ijtihad or reasoning of the salaf, of the scholars. So, difference of opinion in when an ayah starts or stops. And that's why it's important for us to highlight what an ayah is. We say, oh, I know what an ayah is. But you have to appreciate that the Prophet ﷺ used to recite Quran. And how do people know what an ayah starts or ends? Because they didn't mark it physically in the writing. How did they know? Well, if the Prophet ﷺ always stopped here, after this, that's the end of the ayah. If he always, ﷺ, would stop, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, every single time, this is the ayah, end of the ayah. Now, you can appreciate also that there's times where the Prophet ﷺ didn't always stop someplace. Sometimes he would stop here, or sometimes he would keep going. Did he stop to take a breath, ﷺ, or did he stop because it's the end of the ayah? And that's where there's the difference of opinion. And that's why there's ijtihad on the matter. Ijtihad meaning, the scholars coming together and saying the reasoning, right? Based on reason. And so, how would the Sahaba, or how would the scholars determine this? Well, based on how the Prophet ﷺ stopped, or where did he start from, but also the average length of the ayat that are in the cluster of ayat that you're reading, or the rhythm and rhyme of a passage, right? And so there are differences of opinion in terms of the number of ayat in the Quran. In Kufa copy, for example, 6,236. And this is present masahif written in Hafs and Asim. The Basra, 6,200, 6,204. Dimashq, 6,227, so on. So when you say, oh, there's a difference of opinion in ayat, it's because, again, that's why scholars say the stronger opinion is set by the Prophet ﷺ, right? Not only about the Prophet ﷺ, but also ijtihad from the scholars, because sometimes the Prophet ﷺ would stop here, sometimes he'd keep going. But it's important to know that, at least based on this, one of the standard copies where it starts, where it finishes, so that you can fulfill some of these conditions that we talked about. Yes?
So it doesn't mean that some ayahs are missing and some aren't.
No.
It means that
Yes, correct. Absolutely correct. So do you have the mic? Well, I'll repeat it. So it doesn't mean that there's ayats missing. Oh, this has 6,236, this one's 6,204. There is 32 ayats missing. No, it's just how it's divided. That's all it is. The ayat are there, the order's there, how it's divided is different. That makes sense? So this ruined, sorry, this is, your PDF shouldn't have this, so important notes, I keep emphasizing this over and over. Differences only occur on where an ayah starts and stops. The actual arrangement of the words and the phrases is the same. Did not change. Is that clear? Okay. Divisions of the text. So we go from an ayah to a surah, right? Plural is surah, and that means row or fence in Arabic. Linguistically, that means row or fence. So you're putting a fence. Okay? So in technical language, obviously it's the passage division of the Quran into different, call it chapters in the modern English language, that basically it clusters a group of ayat together from another set of ayat. All of the surah start with Basmala, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. That's how they, at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, knew it was an end of a surah and started of another surah. And that's how we do it now, but we also have the very fancy headings, right? Now, there's only one exception to that rule is Surah At-Tawbah, right? Surah At-Tawbah does not start with a Basmala. But the companions knew that Surah Al-Anfal would stop here, and Surah At-Tawbah would be next. Yes? Correct. So there is, so you're allowed, so in terms of continuation, there may be, well, I'll qualify this by saying there may be a difference of opinion that I'm not very versed in, to be honest. But what I want to say is the Sahaba knew that that was a different surah because Surah At-Tawbah was sometimes referred to as, well, Surah At-Tawbah and Surah Bara'ah. That's another name. So how does Surah At-Tawbah start? Bara'ah. Bara'atu min Allahi wa rasulihi, right? So they referred to it as that, and so that classified as a different surah, even though there was no basmala. But when you're reciting, a lot of Taraweeh imams will do it, right? They will go from the end of Anfal right into Tawbah without stopping. And that's perfectly okay. Okay? Names of the surah given by the Prophet ﷺ, it's possible that one surah can have more than one name. Some of the examples here, Surah At-Tawbah again, Bara'ah, based on the first word. Okay? Ghafir is sometimes called Surah Al-Mu'min. Are you guys aware of these? Some of you? Okay, well if you're aware, I need pop quiz. Surah Muhammad. What's another name for Surah Muhammad? Surah Al-Qital. Very good. Surah Al-Qital. What about Surah Al-Insan? Dahr. Very good. Let me think another one. Surah Al-Isra. Bani Israel. So different names for some surah have two names. Okay? So now you can go home and say, to your family, who can recite Surah Al-Qital? Like, what? Yes, Surah Al-Qital, right? Surah Muhammad. So it's typically surah are named, be honest, a story or a theme or a word, right? A word. Surah Al-Baqarah is the story of the cow, right? With Bani Israel, for example. And the longest surah that we know, obviously, not that we know, that exists, but we all know, Surah Al-Baqarah, and the shortest is Al-Kawthar. The number of surah and ayat in the Quran has 114 surah of unequal length. The shortest is 4, the longest is 286. We just said Kawthar and Baqarah. Those are those two. And again, we talked about the names. The order and arrangement of the surah, and the ayat, obviously, we already said were set by the Prophet ﷺ, and that was communicated by Jibreel alayhi salam, right? This was confirmed especially during the last year of the Prophet ﷺ's life in Ramadan when he recited alayhi salam twice fully to Jibreel. Why is it important that we say the last year? Why does it matter that the order was confirmed the last year of the Prophet ﷺ? Because it was the last year, so he had to make sure everything's okay before he left, alayhi salam? Think, yeah. Huh. Yeah, so because if he did it the year before, there was still wahi coming down. So you need to make sure that the order till the last moment is right? Because there's still wahi coming down. And the order, we know the last surah that was revealed to the Prophet was not Surah An-Nas, right? So we talked about that, right? The last ayah, back a few lectures ago. But where does that go? So, well, he made sure that the Prophet, before he passed away, the last year, the last Ramadan, that was confirmed. Now, in terms of the division of the Quran, so now we talked about ayah, then surah, then some scholars even break it down into groups. And this is particularly into 4 groups. So these groups are based on the characteristics of the surah in how we find it today. The order, right? Not the order of revelation, but the order in the Mus'haf, the written order. So the first set of surah called Saba' al-Tiwal, the 7 long ones. So after Surah Al-Fatiha, what are the 7 long ones in order? Baqarah, Ali Imran, Nisa, Ma'idah, An'am, A'raf, that's 6. Well, hold on, there's Anfal, but Anfal is short. Right? We're talking about surahs that have 20 plus pages right now, right? All of a sudden you have Anfal that's short, then followed by Tawbah, which is long again. And there's no basmala between Anfal and Tawbah. So that's why scholars have said it's actually, it's not one surah, but it's when you say Saba' al-Tiwal, the 7th one is really Anfal and Tawbah together. And actually, they talk about the same theme. Right? Anfal and Tawbah talk about fighting, jihad, right? So they talk about the same theme. There's no basmala in between. They group them as one cluster. So Saba' al-Tiwal goes from Surah Al-Baqarah to Surah At-Tawbah, including Surah At-Tawbah, right? And Anfal. Okay? The next grouping is Al-Mi'in. And that goes, what's after Surah At-Tawbah? Yunus. So the next about 25 surah are approximately, Mi'in means like 100. So these surahs are approximately 100 ayat long. And then after Mi'in, Al-Mathani, the third group, which means the often repeated, or repeated. So these are the surah that are actually quite repeated in recitation, in the salah, and so on. Al-Mathani. Except in our time, it's Al-Mufassal. The shorter surahs that are repeated. Al-Mufassal is the last cluster of surahs, the short surahs, beginning of Surah Qaf, all the way to Surah An-Nas. And Mufassal just means separated. And those are the shorter surahs. And this is the breakdown of the Quran. And Shaykh Sa'id Hawa, for example, in his tafsir, talks about these and how are they, he takes the Saba' al-Tiwal, and those are further elaborated on by Al-Ma'in. Al-Ma'in is elaborated on by Mathani and so on, in terms of meaning. Okay? Other divisions of the text, Juzu or Ajza, right? How many Ajza? 30. And Juzu means a part or a portion. The Quran is divided into 30, approximately 20 pages each, right? Except Surah, Juzu, the first Juzu is how many in our standard Mus'haf? 21, because Surah Al-Fatiha has its page, right? And the last Juzu, Juzu Amma, 23. Okay? Which gives you 604. Otherwise, 30 times 20 is 600. And that's in, again, the standard copy that we have printed today. Some copies have also subdivisions called hizb, and there are two of those in each juz'. Okay? So there's 2 hizb per juz'. So Surah Al-Baqarah, for example, the beginning of the second hizb of the Quran, you'll see that sign in the margin, hizb, and that's 2. Okay? And roughly each hizb is divided into quarters, right? And the quarters look like this: rubu' al-hizb, nisf al-hizb, and the symbol there, you can see here, in the ayah. So you'll see the ayah and you see that little star symbol in the text, within the text. That's an indication that a quarter of the hizb is done, but the actual hizb number is on the margin. I'm sure you guys have seen that as well. And then the last division I'll talk about is manzil. Anybody heard of manzil? So the Quran text is divided into 7 parts approximately of equal length, and that allows people to do a khatma of the Quran. So if you do 1 manzil a day, you can finish the Quran in a week. And that's preferred in terms of the recitation of the Quran, that you're finishing it once a week. Right? High aspirations now, but this is the practice of the righteous people, the Salaf. So obviously as short as 3 days, but preferably once a week. And that's why the Quran, some people divide it in manazil, and 1 manzil a day, so that you're finishing it in 1 week. And here, there's a table here that shows what manzil 1 and how many of the ajza fall into it. So approximately 6 ajza into the first manzil, between 5 and 6 basically, which makes sense because 30 divided by 6 or 7 is, almost 5. Yeah, because later on you'll see here, like the last ones have a couple, right? It's not an even cut. It's not an even distribution. Okay, I think that was it for the day. Do I have any? I don't think I have more slides. That's it. Any questions or comments before we close? This is the first time we finished a lecture on time. Alhamdulillah. Yes?
Are there any masahib that show the different beginning and end of the ayat?
You mean like the symbol?
No, like you said, like they are...
Oh, yeah, the different bricks. Yeah, of course. The different, you can probably access them through the different qira'at. The prints, yeah. Okay, interesting facts today? Interesting facts? There's lots to know about the Quran, subhanAllah. And today is more of a history kind of lesson. طيب, jazakumullah khair. Make sure, please, if you haven't contacted me for the one-on-one, to do so. And if you didn't write the exam, please come to me after the class, and we'll arrange for you a time to do it, inshallah. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik, nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun, wa salamun ala al-mursalin, walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. And I forgot to mention the order, the Arabic books have been ordered, I think, inshallah, as of earlier this week. So I don't know when they'll arrive, but once they arrive, we'll be contacting you. If you filled out the survey that you wanted one, you'll get a copy, inshallah. Jazakumullah.